A captain season within Survivor is defined as a season that has a minority of returning Survivor contestants. Therefore, in this video, we'll be looking at the successes or shortcomings of returning contestants on seasons that had anywhere between 1 to 4 of them. Survivor Guatemala was the first season to utilise this concept, even from its inception. Originally, it was used as a way to reimburse Wanda and Jonathan for being eliminated from the schoolyard pick, not tribal council, in a situation where they only spent 24 hours in the game. And I'm not gonna lie, Wanda and Jonathan as captains would have been amazing. Instead, the production team decided to go for a more grandiose entrance, featuring the last two standing oolongs in the now infamous train wreck of a tribe from Palau, the season prior. They of course were Stephanie LaGrossa and Bobby John. Surprisingly, these two did pretty well on the return, all things considered, and it was nice seeing Stephanie actually not having to go to every tribal council. In spite of being part of the minority and being argumentative, Bobby John was safe coming into the merge. He was helped by Stephanie, who got him to the final 9 when the jury phase began, thus fulfilling his wish of actually making the jury, unlike last time. Stephanie superseded that and made it to the final 2, but she had burnt bridges with practically every juror, and only got Rafe's vote at the end. Considering the targets put onto both of their backs through being part of the first captain season, it's remarkable both of them made it to the final tribal, with one pitching their game and the other on the jury bench. 11 seasons later, we got our next captain season, which followed a similar format to Guatemala. This was Redemption Island, everyone's favourite season. The two captains this time were debatably the two biggest villains in Survivor history, Russell Hantz and Rob Mariano. The two didn't really fight their villain stereotype, however, and Russell particularly fell victim to this. His Zapatero tribe felt he was a complete anchor due to his scheming. In episode 3, they threw the challenge to get him out. In spite of stating he is one of the greatest players to ever play the game, Russell ultimately ended up as the second boot on this season, and currently he is the captain eliminated earliest on this list in Survivor US history. Rob, on the other hand, similarly hit rough ground in his first few days. Francesca openly had an anti-returnee sentiment, and a minority contingent was in its infancy, preparing to overthrow Rob. But Rob secured the majority on his tribe and entered the merge with the numbers. It's at this stage where Rob executed a brutally effective strategy that painted his alliance as a quote-unquote cult by the minority. Rob created his buddy system, and it was a prisoner dilemma disguised among his 6-man majority. Essentially, no one could chat around camp without a second person. No one could ever scheme in fear of their buddy ratting them out, and ultimately it created a hive mind mentality where everyone followed Rob into oblivion. Many consider Rob's win to be the most dominant in Survivor history, and his manipulation of newbie players is a testament of that. In spite of the season's shortcomings, there are some things to be positive on. For example, as noted by one of my commenters, even though the season didn't go well, I can't deny that Rob and Russell were the perfect picks for captains. One was the biggest villain from the newer era at that point, and Rob was the Mafasio still trying to prove that he had it. But one season later, the Redemption Island plus captain theme concept returned once again. Considering the precedent set in season 22, it was assumed the two captains would have some unsettled conflict, resulting in their returns. Instead, it was Coach and Ozzy, two contestants with literally nothing in common. In spite of this, the tribes honestly seemed perfect for each captain, and imagining Coach on Savai or Ozzy on Apollo just feels odd. Redemption Island was a massive boon for a challenge beast like Ozzy, and so he used the island to his advantage many times. When Christine was winning challenge after challenge, Ozzy was concerned she would return to the game, return to the Apollos, and then outnumber his tribe 7-5 at the merge. So instead of taking out the obvious boot in Cochrane, Ozzy volunteered himself as a tribute to then subsequently beat Christine in the duel. This was all for naught, as instead of returning the favour, Cochrane flipped to the Apollos. After Keith was eliminated at the merge, Ozzy was the next out without immunity. This is when Ozzy completely flipped his strategy, and instead on Redemption Island he set up his so-called Pleasure Dome. When contestants were eliminated, they were bitter of those left in the game while starving. That's when they met Ozzy. Ozzy listened to all their problems when they arrived at night and into the morning, then went out to catch fish for them in the afternoon. It was really a one-man resort with Ozzy as the owner, while the contestants were thankful patrons. Essentially, Ozzy was amassing an army of jury members that would happily vote for him at the end. Ozzy lived a series of days unable to be voted out. Plus, because he wasn't in the game, he didn't have any of the blood on his hands when a contestant got voted out. When Ozzy returned to the game at the final 5, he was the #1 target, and when Sophie won the final 4 immunity, he was eliminated by the Apollos. On the topic of Apollo, Coach was leading this group like a cult, similar to Boston Rob. The illusion of religion allowed him to manipulate his peers, while also wiping away responsibility. Instead of owning this aspect of his game, Coach had one of the worst final tribal performances, as he instead doubled down on his game of honour. In fact, by the end he even apologises to the jury for not being honourable enough. It's one of the biggest what-ifs in Survivor history, but many feel if Coach owned his game of deceit, that he could have been the South Pacific winner instead of Sophie. The Philippines had a unique captain season. Personally, I really hope it is a casting twist that returns someday, as I really enjoyed it. All 3 captains were previously medically evacuated, and they were seen as robbed of their time on the island. This included Jonathan Penner, Russell Swan, and Michael Scoobin. Although Colton was set to be in Penner's position before fan backlash was so bad that they swapped him out. Survivor production, I bash on you guys a lot, but considering what happens in Blood vs. Water, I don't think I can argue. Russell was a part of the now iconic Matt Singh tribe that couldn't win a challenge to save its life, although he did survive 3 tribal councils before meeting his demise. Penner was met with an anti-returnee sentiment, particularly from Jeff Kent, but integrated himself into the core of his Calabow tribe and made a deep run, even if it was aided by his different forms of immunity. Then we have Scoopin. As much as I hate to acknowledge this man's existence, I have to admit he played fairly well. Now the problem with Michael is that he was incredibly cocky. He assumed if he made it to the end, the jury would completely disregard the other finalists, fall at his feet, and hand him the million out of their own pockets. This explains why Scoopin would make some weird plays, and why he was so willing to have the best of the best at the end in his eyes. To several members of the jury, Scoopin was a massive laughingstock. They even treated him as such in their jury statements. But he still continued the theme of one returnee making it to the final tribal council, even if he wasn't able to beat Denise for the title of sole survivor. The Edge of Extinction then refurbished the captain format and allowed 2 captains on each tribe. The most returnees we had ever seen for a captain season. The returnees this season had very little in common with one another, apart from the fact these were 4 contestants that you really knew Jeff wished won the game. Joe and Aubrey were immediately targeted on the Kama tribe, so in spite of the tribe's early dominance, Aubrey was eliminated following the swap. Joe didn't win immunity at the merge, which has been his death sentence in 2 prior seasons, with the season 38 cast treating the merge round no differently. Then on to the Manu tribe, which was a completely different story. This tribe was a complete mess in challenges that continuously lost. In spite of the Kelly-David rivalry getting testy at some points, they stuck together alongside Lauren and War Dog to make the merge. Then they immediately started gunning after each other, but at least they tried, right? Nevertheless, David was taken out, leaving Kelly Wentworth as the last standing returnee. Remember when I referred to earlier in the video about how a returnee always made it to the final tribal? Well, finally that stigma was acknowledged. War Dog was a big Survivor fan and wanted to flip the vote onto Kelly at the final 9. In order to do this, he needed Ron's vote, and in quite a meta way, he brought up how, in every single one of the prior seasons, a captain made it to the final tribal. As a result, for the first time ever, all the captains were eliminated before the endgame, as Kelly was blindsided in a 5-4 vote. The final person that technically fits the captain criteria on my list is from the most recent season, Bruce. Now, is Bruce a captain per se? It's tough. On one hand, you can argue because there wasn't an even number of returnees distributed across the tribes that he isn't one. With that said, he was personally called out as a returnee by Jeff, had a match chat about what he learned from Survivor 44, and his entire episode 1 storyline contained him desperately trying not to be the leader while explaining techniques he learned a few months ago. So I felt, yeah, that justified at least a mention on this list. Considering we're only 2 episodes into season 45, it's really tough to gauge Bruce's trajectory within the game. But from what we can gather, Bruce seems to have a one-sided rivalry with Katurah, who is the only person not laughing with them. However, Bruce's goofy antics have made him relatively popular on the tribe, and his return was definitely warranted considering how screwed over he was in season 44. To help my videos reach others more consistently, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. On screen now are the 5 most brutal premieres, again featuring Survivor 44, so make sure to check it out. Nevertheless, enjoy your day. Peace!